Welcome back to the S&T Football Podcast. I'm your man, Say. I'm here with my boy, Tom. And today we are going to be previewing the 2026 college football season in regards to the Big Ten Conference. So the Big Ten has obviously taken their spot at the top of the throne of the college football hierarchy with their three consecutive national championship wins going back to Michigan, and then it was Ohio State, and now Indiana in 3 consecutive years. So the Big Ten is now running things in college football. This conference has gotten stronger over recent years with the additions of teams like Oregon and USC and Washington from the Pac 12 as well. The resurgence of Indiana, things like that have made this conference just so good and so deep and just a must watch each and every week. And, has now become the obvious rival of the SEC for top conference in college football. So the Big Ten looks to be very interesting again this season. Last year, Indiana won the Big Ten, going undefeated. They beat Ohio State in the Big Ten championship en route to their national championship as well. But many contenders looking to knock Indiana off the throne in Ohio State as well. So let's dive into our predictions for our conference championship matchups, as well as some teams that look to be X factors and dark horses for the Big Ten this upcoming season. So without much further ado, Tom, give me your predictions for the Big Ten in 2026.
Okay, so I love what you said, how the Big Ten has won the last three natties, and also a key factor in saying that is it's not just like Alabama when they went on their absolute dynasty run. I mean, they were in the national championship every single year for, like 6 years straight, it felt like. Maybe it was more. But what we're looking at here with the Big Ten is a diversity. So like you said, you had Oregon, Indiana, Ohio State make the playoff last year. Obviously, Indiana was the one that eventually won the championship. But if you want to look at predictions as far as college football playoffs are concerned, you can look back. The Big Ten has consistently had three teams that have deserved to make the playoffs. If you go back even to the 4-team playoff, the Big Ten would still at least have one representative. And that wasn't based on bias. That was just based off whether they deserved to be there or not. You had Michigan, and, we mentioned this in the last video, but when the Pac-12 disbanded, there were two teams from the Pac-12 that made the playoffs and then joined the Big Ten. So we're talking now, even though it's a 12-team playoff, the Big Ten is basically the Big Ten and all the good teams from the Pac-12. That's just how it is. In my opinion, I think it's going to be Oregon versus Ohio State. Now, Ohio State might be kind of a controversial pick to some people, but I think we forget that Ohio State still has Ryan Day. They're still in their same program, same coaches, same locker room. I think Ohio State goes through the season and actually comes out better on the other side, whereas I think, some people might think Ohio State has a tough schedule. They're definitely going to lose at least one or two and not make the Big Ten champ. I think Ohio State actually does well this year because that they have so many difficult games on their schedule. I think Indiana is probably going to be a very close third place. I think Indiana is going to tie the second place team, whether that's Oregon or Ohio State. But I think that they lose the head-to-head this year. Now, again, I'll eat my words betting against Kurt Signetti again. But I do think that last year was kind of a miracle year for Indiana. But another team that I would like to mention is Michigan. Now, I know Michigan, they went through all that controversy with their head coach, but they got a really good head coach from Utah. And I think that he can come in, especially because he was able to kind of corral most of the main players from Michigan to stay at Michigan. And so I think with his system, if he just comes in, because Utah basically plays like a Big Ten game. So I think with, what's his name? It's not Dillingham. What's his name? Who?
Are you talking about the new Michigan coach?
Yeah, the Michigan coach that came from Utah.
Yeah, Kyle Whittingham. Yeah.
Kyle Whittingham, yes, it was, yeah, Kyle Whittingham.
Yeah.
He's going to be almost, I think, a perfect replacement to keep Michigan relevant. Where I don't know, like I said, they're going to be a dark horse because they have the players on the roster. They didn't lose their big play stars, and they brought in probably a better coach than what they had last year, just assuming, all the controversy and stuff. I think Whittingham is going to be a better coach with the same star players. And I mean, you've seen what he's done with Utah in the past. He's had multiple good teams. Well, now he's at Michigan, which, I mean, Michigan, that means that just they get better recruits. It means more in Michigan. I think he's going to do just fine at Michigan. So I think Michigan is going to be another wild card team similar to Indiana, where if Michigan can win big games and if they can win the games that they should, I mean, the main part in the Big Ten in any conference really is you just have to win the games that you should win. So I think Michigan is another wild card. And now we also have, this is a crazy wild card, but Penn State. How does Penn State come back? How does Penn State respond? Now, maybe it's not this year, but will we see Penn State have a little resurgence? Because I think what Penn State really needs, especially with a first-year head coach after James Franklin left, which, again, not really. I think Penn State's in the same spot Nebraska was when Nebraska fired Bo Pelini. They probably shouldn't have fired James Franklin because, I mean, you just have to have hope that eventually he can figure it out. But how does Penn State respond now with a new head coach, bringing in, some new players, but they have a decent amount of returning players as well? So I think Penn State is going to be probably the darkest of the dark horses, but I think Penn State is going to be a team to watch where maybe they don't contend in the Big Ten championship, but I could see Penn State playing the upset party when it comes to the Big Ten championship, because I feel like Penn State is going to get a team. They're going to beat one team this year that they shouldn't beat. And I don't think Nebraska is going to be the same, but I feel like Nebraska and Penn State are in similar boats right now, considering the Big Ten, where Nebraska plays a lot of really good teams. Penn State, I think they still have the talent to beat a good team. And I think that this coach, their new coach, I feel like if he can manufacture an upset, I think that's going to solidify him, because that was the main reason they fired James Franklin. So I think watch out for Penn State upsetting a team that they definitely shouldn't beat. And I'm not talking, Wisconsin, I'm not talking Michigan. I'm talking Ohio State. I feel like they're going to upset a team this year that they have no right upsetting and throwing the college football playoff into a tizzy. That's what I think Penn State's going to be. I don't know if they're really going to be contenders for the Big Ten championship. They need to figure something out. They need to be one of the really good teams they play. And they need to take care of business other places, obviously, but compared to like the Michigans, Ohio States, Oregons, Indianas of the Big Ten, I think those Penn State and Nebraska this year are going to play a big role in who makes the college football playoff, whether they can beat a team they're not supposed to beat. And I think Penn State especially. I could see Penn State having a rough year and they take a game they're not supposed to. So for as far as the Big Ten goes, I mean, that's my prediction is Oregon, Ohio State, because I think Ohio State takes care of business. Indiana, I think Indiana might be the team that loses the game they're not supposed to lose, like to a Penn State, to a Nebraska. I could see Indiana dropping one they're not supposed to, and then also dropping one that they are supposed to, and that keeps them not out of the playoff, but I do think that Indiana is going to be a solid third in the Big Ten. Well, maybe fourth, depends on how Michigan handles their business, but I think with Michigan's first-year head coach adjusting to the program and stuff, even though they have a good roster, I think it's going to be Oregon number 1, Ohio State 2, Indiana 3, and Michigan 4. Now, Indiana and Michigan are interchangeable for me, but that's my prediction for the Big Ten. Saison, I talk too much. Take it away.
Great stuff there, Tom. I really like your predictions and all the context that you gave surrounding your predictions and whatnot. There's some things I agree with and some things I disagree with. So let me get into it. So I agree with that Oregon is the team to beat in the Big Ten this upcoming season. Something about the Ducks and just the way these last couple seasons have ended for them. They have just gotten so close to the top, to the pinnacle, and have come up just a little bit short in back to back seasons. The first season, they went undefeated. They won the Big Ten, but then they lost in the first round in that upset to Ohio State in the Rose Bowl. Well, I don't even know if I want to call it an upset because Ohio State ended up winning it all, but undefeated number one seed losing to a number 8 seed or whatever Ohio State was. A little disappointing for them that year. Last season, Oregon did not make the Big Ten championship, but they were able to win 2 games in the playoff. They were able to beat James Madison in the first round. They beat Texas Tech in the second round before eventually losing to Indiana in the semifinals. So they got even further than they did the previous season going undefeated, which is crazy just how the playoff works and whatnot. But 2 seasons in a row where they just come up short. This Oregon team is just licking at their chops trying to get to a championship. Still have not won one in their program history. For all of you who don't know, Oregon Ducks have never won a national championship. So that is something that this program is just starving for. When I heard that their quarterback, Dante Moore, was coming back and that he was not declaring for the draft, he was projected to be like the number 1, number 2 overall draft pick. So this guy could have easily been drafted extremely high in the draft and could be starting for a team in the NFL this upcoming season. But instead, he decided to come back. And that was alongside the transfer of Dylan Raiola, who came over from Nebraska. Of course, don't want to bring that up for you, but it's relevant because, like, oh, we thought Dylan Raiola was going to take over the Oregon program. Actually, no, Dante Moore's coming back, who just happens to be an even better 5-star quarterback. So now Oregon just has 2 5-star quarterbacks on their roster, one of them just sitting there waiting for his opportunity. So something about the fact that whenever teams just have talent like that stacked on their roster, they always seem to do well. I mean, it just makes sense when you have talent like that, but just something about like having 2 5-star, possibly future NFL quarterbacks just sitting on your roster. It inspires the competition between the two and it somehow makes your starter play even better. So just something about this Oregon team this year. I just feel like they have the magic this season. I feel like it's their year and they're going to make this the year that they finally win it all. And there's not much I can say against Oregon because, they're as good as it gets. So they're just reloading, and I feel like they're just going to be a touch better than they've been the past 2 seasons where they almost got to a national championship anyway. So something about this Oregon Ducks team this season. Now, next up, Indiana, because I do believe the conference championship will be Oregon versus Indiana. I do not pick against Indiana anymore. I know you kind of touched on it a little earlier, going against Chris Ignetti. I learned my lesson last year, okay, Tom? I learned my lesson. I picked against them multiple times last year, especially when they played Ohio State in the Big Ten championship. I was like, yeah, this is kind of where the fun ends. I know it was a cool undefeated season, but nope. And then it didn't end when they made the playoff. They ran through everybody in the playoff. They won the national championship. I no longer pick against Indiana. Okay, so I'm not saying Indiana's going to go undefeated again. I don't think they will because they do have a couple tough games during the regular season playing Michigan, I believe. But Indiana's going to be right there. They just got a quarterback from TCU, Josh Hoover, is going to take over as their guy. So they're starting to get really good recruits in the transfer portal and in high school recruiting as well, just because of the success that they've had of recent. They're starting to get more attention. So Indiana's not going anywhere. Like I no longer see them as a fluke anymore. I kind of thought the first time they made the playoff and they lost, I thought that was a fluke year, but they proved to me obviously that wasn't. I no longer have any doubts about Indiana. So the only question for me is how many games is Indiana going to win this year? Are they going to win 12 again? Are they going to win 11? Are they going to win 10? Is 10-2 going to be good enough? I feel like it is because you're in the Big Ten and you just won the Natty last year. So Indiana gets the benefit of the doubt for sure, if you ask me. But that's my only question regarding the Hoosiers. I believe they're going to be right back in the playoff again, but not going anywhere. Now, here's where it gets real interesting for me. Ohio State. Now, Ohio State is Ohio State. We all understand that, yes. And Ohio State does what Ohio State does, yes. This team has not missed the playoff since it became 12 teams. Now, I know that's only a couple years, but like they're almost a surefire lock to make the playoff each and every season, right? Except for this year, because I have no reason to be against Ohio State. I'm not down on them. I'm not saying anything like that. But when I saw their schedule this year, I know you touched on it earlier, but I feel like this schedule it's bigger than what you were trying to emphasize. I feel like it's bigger than that. And I do want to talk about their schedule more in depth in another episode, so I won't go too far, but Ohio State has a very difficult schedule this season. More difficult than any schedule I've seen them have in basically any year I've seen Ohio State play a schedule. They always have these like cupcake schedules. Because they assume that Michigan's going to be great every year. So it's like, oh, Michigan, you have to play them every year. So the rest of your schedule is just going to be Purdue's and Northwesterns and shit like that. Like, whoever made Ohio State's schedule this year was like, nah, we're going to actually make you compete this season each and every week. So let me just give you the opponents that Ohio State has in their schedule this upcoming season. Texas, at Texas, by the way, rematch of the week 1 game last year that Ohio State hosted. At Texas, at Iowa, week 5. Never a fun place to play in Iowa City, Iowa, especially when you're a ranked team and have a lot on the line. At Indiana, week 7. At USC, week 9. They host Oregon week 10. They're at Nebraska week 12. And then they host Michigan in the last week in week 13. My guy, that is 6 losable games. Now, I'm not saying Ohio State's gonna lose them, right? But that's 6, 7, actually. Wait, Texas, Iowa, Indiana, USC, Oregon, possibly Nebraska, Michigan. That's actually 7 losable games that Ohio State has on their schedule this year. Now, of course, they're not going to lose all of them. We know that. But are they going to win 5 out of 7? Are they going to win 6 out of 7? Because if either of those questions is not true, that means they're going 9-3. Worse. And as great as Ohio State is, I don't see them winning 5 out of 7 of those games because you're telling me they're going to beat Texas on the road. They're going to beat Indiana on the road, beat USC on the road, beat Oregon, beat Michigan, beat Nebraska on the road. That's just too much for one team. I don't care how good they are. You could have said it's Ohio State. You could have said it's Alabama, Indiana. Anyone would have had a tough time playing this many good teams, especially these road games that Ohio State has. I just don't see them going 11-1 this year. I don't see it. Or 10-2 is a stretch, really. But in my personal opinion, I think Ohio State's going to go 9-3 this season, and they're going to be the best 9-3 team you ever seen. I'm not saying they're going to be bad, but there's 3 losses here to me. I feel like they're going to lose to Texas, they're going to lose at Indiana, and they're possibly going to lose either at USC, at Iowa, or versus Oregon because they lost to Oregon last year, or the year before. So I don't see Ohio State making it out of this schedule with only 1 loss, let alone 2. I just don't see it, and you might disagree, Tom, but like I feel like this might be the year that's like, dang, Ohio State might just mess around and miss the playoff for losing 3 games. Now they will have the strongest argument of any team up to this point that has 3 losses. I mean, forget Texas last year; they have nothing on what this Ohio State team would be at 9-3. But is it going to be good enough to make the playoff? We will see. How many teams will the Big Ten send to the playoff this year? Because last year they only sent 3. So we will see, especially because I think there's going to be other Big Ten teams that now come into the conversation. So Ohio State is a very large question mark for me. And to be honest, I do believe it is a possibility that they miss the playoff this year, as crazy as that sounds. Moving on to a couple other teams I want to mention real quick, unless you want to jump in, Tom. Michigan, like you mentioned, a new coach with Kyle Whittingham coming over from Utah. He takes over the program. He had Utah at the heights of heights these past several years, going back to their Rose Bowl wins. They had a super crazy win against Ohio State in the Rose Bowl a couple years back. And Utah has been, a very solid program going from the Pac-12 now to the Big 12 in the last couple years. And he moves over to Michigan, takes over their program after all the controversy and whatnot. And I do think this was a great hire for Michigan. He might even be better than what they had in Sharon Moore. I think Kyle Whittingham is a better coach than what he was, more experience, just been there more times. And I feel like this was a great match. Now, my question is, how much can he get out of their quarterback? Because their quarterback that they paid all that money to, blanking on his name right now. What's the Michigan quarterback's name? Bryce Underwood. All right. So Bryce Underwood, that quarterback that they recruited a couple years ago, number 1 overall recruit, they paid all that money to. He did not live up to expectations in his freshman year. Now, as a true starting freshman, it is, understandable. We get it, especially when you're playing at the highest level. playing at a big school like Michigan in the Big Ten. But it was disappointing because Michigan has had some underwhelming quarterback performances going back several years now. I mean, their weakest spot has probably been at quarterback, and that's been really the biggest question mark for them for multiple years now. And they thought when they got Bryce Underwood that was going to change. Unfortunately, it did not last season. 11 touchdowns, 9 interceptions was not a great year for him throwing the ball. So Michigan still is looking to turn that around. Now, he is still going to be their guy going into this next season. So will Kyle Whittingham be able to kind of ignite that spark in Underwood and be able to get him to a place where he is now throwing the ball at a proficient level? Because Michigan needs that to be able to compete with the best of the best in the Big Ten. If they cannot get good quarterback play, they cannot compete with Ohio State, with Indiana, with Oregon. They just cannot. So that is going to be the question mark for them. Can Bryce Underwood start playing like the 5-star that they thought he was coming out of high school? But I do believe Michigan will be right there. I just don't think they're going to be able to compete with the best of the best. So it's going to be another 8-4, 9-3, 7-5 type season for Michigan. And then Penn State. Penn State is very interesting this year because of what we saw happen to them, almost like Michigan. They had a whole bunch of controversy over there, firing James Franklin after several years of him being their coach and being one of the best teams in college football, but just never being able to kind of get over that hump and get to the championship level type of program that they wanted to be. Now, they did make it all the way to the semifinals a couple years ago in the playoffs, but just, those big games just always seem to elude the Nittany Lions when it came down to it. Now, they finally let go of James Franklin in the middle of the year last season after everything just went off the rails. They lost to UCLA. They lost like 3 or 4 games in a row or something like that. And their entire season just went off the rails. So they went ahead and finally had an excuse to let him go. So they kicked him to the curb.
I mean, they didn't really have an excuse to let him go, but they did anyway. I mean, kind of.
Well, because for the years prior to that, the biggest gripe against James Franklin was that he couldn't win the big one. It was like, yeah, you go 10-2 and 11-1 every year, but you can't win the big one. You can't get us to that Big Ten championship and win it. You can't get us to the national championship and win it. That was like the biggest thing they could really say about them. Other than that, he was a good coach. And then finally, when like the winning stopped, when the winning finally stopped and they started losing, I feel like they kind of had a reason to finally justify. So Penn State's got a new coach now. They went ahead and hired Iowa State's coach, Matt Campbell. They got Iowa State's head coach for the last several years, Mr. Matt Campbell, who was doing a very good job down there in Ames, Iowa for the Cyclones. And he moves over to Penn State and takes over for James Franklin. So they're getting a very experienced and competent head coach coming from the Big 12. This is a jump up for him in competition, I would say, but I do believe that he is a very stable and influential head coach that is going to bring good change for Penn State. So I'm not going to write Penn State off based off one season. They did have one down season last year. Still were able to finish 6-6 and even win a bowl game. So even with that, they still had some things that they could write home about a little bit. But Penn State is not going anywhere. They have been there as a perennial contender for the last decade at least. And just because one bad season, I don't think they're going to fall off all the way. So I do see them bouncing back. The only question is how much do they bounce back? Do they bounce back and, go like 8-4, or do they bounce back and get right back to the playoff contender type, going 10-2, 11-1. Well, one thing that might affect how that turns out is this schedule that Penn State has. Now, opposite of Ohio State, Penn State has a very easy schedule this upcoming season. Let me run through Penn State's schedule for you real quick. Marshall, Temple, Buffalo, Wisconsin, Northwestern, USC at home, at Michigan, versus Purdue, at Washington, versus Minnesota, at Maryland. Now, compared to Ohio State, this schedule is an absolute cakewalk. Because I told you that Ohio State had, depends on who you ask, but up to 7 losable games, even as good as they are, Ohio State being. Penn State, as good as they are, and I'm going off like last season where they lost 6 games, I see 3 losable games, maybe, versus USC, at Michigan, at Washington. Those are like the only losable games I see on this schedule for Penn State. Because when you have Marshall, Temple, Buffalo, and Wisconsin and Northwestern 5 weeks in a row, that's the first 5 games of the season. If Penn State is even a fraction of what they were before last season, this is going to be an absolute cakewalk up until week 6 against USC, which they have at home. So they already have 5 warm-up games to get ready to have a home game against the Trojans. I mean, if this was a year for Penn State to bounce back, this was the year, because they gave them the easiest schedule in the Big Ten, at least amongst the actual contenders. So Penn State is sitting pretty when it comes to the playoff this year, because if they can get back to what they were, this is going to be a playoff year for them, because those 3 games, if they just win 2 of them and they win the rest, that's 11-1. They're a surefire bet at 11-1. They're probably a bet at 10-2. I mean, I bet the biggest argument would be against them that their schedule was super easy, but they're probably a lock at 10-2 as well. So I don't see Penn State losing more than 3 games if they're the Penn State that we've known for years and years. If they're the 6-6 Penn State from last year that decided to lose 4 games in a row at the beginning of the season, okay, I don't know. But based off the Penn State that we all know and we're used to, this Penn State team is going to be a playoff team. So watch out for Penn State. And then last but not least, the last team I'll go over is USC. And USC is very interesting because each and every year we expect Lincoln Riley to break out down there and finally get USC to the promised land, being the playoff. And each and every season we see them come up short of that goal. USC had another solid year last year. They went 9-4, but still were a couple games away from being a serious college football playoff team. Now USC, they got a great quarterback in Jada Mayava who came back, and he's one of the better quarterbacks in the Big Ten and overall in college football. Lincoln Riley still their head coach holding it down, and USC always has very good talent surrounding their football program. It's just a question of how much can they compete against the best of the best. It's really the same question that Penn State has each and every season, is how do they do against the best of the best? Because USC can beat all the teams they're supposed to beat, yes. But can they beat the Michigans, Oregons, and Ohio States? Because USC has to play Oregon week 4. They play Washington week 5. They play Penn State week 6. They play Ohio State week 9. They play Indiana week 11. USC has a tougher schedule. That's 5 losable games. Well, I expect them to take care of Washington at home, but, that's a rivalry. That's an old Pac-12 game. You never know. But, Oregon, Penn State, Ohio State, Indiana, that's 4 losable games at least. And usually in those games, USC comes up short, and they're not able to come out on top in those games. So the question is for USC, how good are they this year, and how much can they actually compete when it comes down to it?